So, I want you to picture a nation in the early 2010s. If you were paying, any attention at all to global news back then, you probably know exactly what country became the ultimate symbol of catastrophic debt.
Oh, yeah. It was hard to miss,
Right. Its economy had contracted by this staggering 25%. Youth unemployment was brushing up against 65%.
which is just an unbelievable number.
It really is. It was a place in a state of, well, managed survival, basically, defined by intense austerity, daily protests, and just this constant looming threat of a sovereign default that genuinely terrified the rest of the world.
The entire Eurozone was holding its breath.
Exactly. That was Greece. Now, I want you to snap forward to today, to March 2026, because that very same country is now operating as this booming European energy hub.
Yeah, the turnaround is wild.
It is. They are aggressively paying off their bailout debt a full decade ahead of schedule. And in a pivot that sounds honestly genuinely futuristic, they are currently deploying an artificial intelligence-powered defense shield.
The contrast is just jarring, frankly. I mean, it defies the standard economic gravity we are used to seeing when a nation falls that deep into a fiscal hole.
It really does. And today, we are taking a deep dive into a comprehensive new geopolitical and economic review by Dr. Fareed Novin. It was published just this month in March 2026.
It's a fantastic paper.
Really detailed. And the mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how a nation goes from the absolute brink of financial collapse to what Dr. Novin terms a state of strategic extroversion. We want to know what this massive turnaround actually looks like under the hood.
Because it's not just magic.
Right. And more importantly, we want to explore what it means for you. Whether you are trying to understand the future of the European Union or maybe you're a global investor looking at shifting markets. Let's unpack this. Because to truly understand where Greece is today, you really have to understand the sheer depth of the crater it had to climb out of.
Yeah, that's really the only place to start. And our goal here is to look past the surface level numbers you might just see in a headline, right? Like the GDP bumps or the employment rates.
You need to go deeper than that.
Exactly. We need to dissect the structural and institutional rebirth that made those numbers possible. Because the origins of this turnaround began in a decade of severe decline. And you really cannot understand the Greek financial crisis without looking at the 2004 Athens Olympics.
Oh, man. The 2004 Olympics, at the time, I remember it felt like this massive cultural victory. Like Greece was really stepping onto the world stage.
Which is a huge moment of pride.
But the fiscal hangover was brutal. The original budget for those games was supposed to be 4.5 billion euros. It ended up doubling to about 9.1 billion euros.
Which is a massive overrun.
Right. And a lot of that highly specialized infrastructure just sat there afterward. It was either completely abandoned or widely underutilized. The spending spree pushed their debt to GDP ratio to 103% by the end of 2004.
And the worst part about that.
Oh, the reporting. Right.
Yeah. Eurostat later revealed that those numbers were actually heavily underreported. It was a structural fragility that was just completely masked by abnormally cheap Eurozone credit.
Because they were in the euro.
Exactly. Because Greece was using the euro, lenders treated Greek debt as if it were, as safe as German debt.
Yeah.
So when the 2008 global financial crisis hit, the illusion totally shattered.
The markets brutalized them.
They brutally repriced that sovereign risk. And what followed were basically the harshest peacetime fiscal consolidation programs in modern history. I mean, the banking sector essentially froze solid.
Wow.
Yeah, at the height of the crisis, non-performing exposures, which are basically loans that are in default or extremely close to it, they exceeded 45% of total bank exposures.
I want you to just pause and think about that number for a second. 45%.
Almost half.
It is like a homeowner deciding to max out multiple credit cards to throw a massive block party house party, nearly going bankrupt when the bill inevitably comes due, and now somehow they're the most financially disciplined house on the entire street.
That's a great way to put it.
Because if you fast forward to early 2026, those non-performing loans are under 4%. All the major rating agencies, including Moody's back in 2025, have restored Greece's investment grade status.
But, I mean, I have to push back here.
Sure.
Because whenever I see a miraculous financial recovery, I immediately get skeptical. Like, is this just accounting magic? Are they just moving bad debt from one government ledger to another? Or did the actual fundamental machinery of the economy change?
Well, you are completely right to be skeptical, but the short answer is that it required immense, really painful structural change. This was not just some paper trick.
Okay, so how do they do it?
Bringing non-performing loans down from 45% to under 4% required something called the Hellenic Asset Protection Scheme, or HEPS.
Wait, how does that actually work in practice?
So think of a bank's balance sheet like a plumbing system, right? If 45% of your pipes are clogged with bad loans money that is just never coming back, the water can't flow.
You literally can't do business. Exactly. You physically cannot lend money to the bakery down the street or the new tech startup in Athens. So, to clear the pipes, the banks had to actively bundle these bad loans and sell them off to distressed debt investors.
But why would an investor want to buy a bundle of bad loans? That sounds terrible.
Because they buy them for pennies on the dollar. So if a loan is worth 100 euros, the bank might sell it to a hedge fund for, say, 10 euros just to get it off their books.
Ah, okay.
The hedge fund then tries to recover maybe 15 or 20 euros down the line to make a profit. But to make these bundles attractive enough to sell in the first place, the Greek government used the HPS program to essentially guarantee the least risky slice of those bundles.
So the government took on some risk to grease the wheels.
Exactly. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Banks took massive losses to clear their books, but it actually worked. The pipes are clear. And returning to that kind of fiscal health gives a country the agency to actually, reshape its domestic economy.
Right, because they aren't just putting out fires anymore.
Yeah. For instance, in late 2024, we saw the merger of Pankrita Bank and Attica Bank,
Creating a fifth pillar in their banking system, which is a really huge deal because for a long time, four major banks essentially operated as an oligopoly there.
Right, there wasn't enough competition.
And adding a fifth credible competitor actually puts downward pressure on lending margins. It makes it cheaper for small and medium enterprises to finally get capital, which has been a huge roadblock in Greece for over a decade.
Definitely.
And all of this underlying discipline leads to what I think is the ultimate flex for a country that used to be the global poster child for debt.
You're referring to the early repayments.
Yes. In June 2026, Greece is scheduled to repay 7 billion euros of its first bailout package. The Greek loan facility totally ahead of schedule.
And this isn't even a one-off thing.
No, not at all. They repaid 2.6 billion in 2022, over 5 billion in 2023, nearly 8 billion in 2024. Now they are aiming to clear the remaining 31.6 billion euros by 2031, which is a full decade ahead of the original 2041 schedule.
Which is a move that saves them roughly 1.6 billion euros in interest payments alone. I mean, because of this aggressive repayment schedule, their debt-to-GDP ratio is projected to drop to 138.2% this year.
Which is a 7.7 percentage point drop in a single year. That's massive.
And that is only possible because they are running a primary budget surplus of around 3.5 to 4% as of 2024.
Just to clarify for anyone listening, a primary budget surplus means the government is taking in more money through taxes than it is spending on public services, but before you factor in the interest payments on their old debt.
Right. It proves they're actually living below their means.
That is the crucial distinction.
And here is where we see the causal link to the broader economy. Because the banks were finally stabilized and the government wasn't panicked about an imminent default, they could turn their attention and their capital toward optimizing their primary economic engine,
which is tourism. And it is a massive engine. Tourism accounts for about 20% of Greece's GDP. Post-pandemic, the volume they are seeing is just staggering. In 2023, they had 32 million international arrivals.
which is huge.
For a country with a population of about 10 million, yeah, that makes them one of the most visited nations on Earth per capita. But Dr. Noben's report highlights a pretty severe structural threat hidden in those numbers.
Right. It's not all good news.
High-density, mass tourism packed into a very short summer season is actively threatening the protected wetland habitats of the Aegean archipelago.
Yeah, economists refer to this as the seasonal trap. When a country relies heavily on a massive influx of revenue that only lasts for, maybe 3 or 4 months, it creates extreme cyclicality.
Right, feast or famine.
Exactly. It distorts regional income distribution, it puts immense strain on local water and waste infrastructure, and it leaves seasonal workers highly vulnerable for the rest of the year. So the government's pivot here is a fascinating case study. They are aggressively moving toward a model of yield over volume.
It kind of reminds me of a restaurant owner realizing their entire business model is broken. Imagine a place transitioning from a high-volume fast food franchise, churning out thousands of cheap meals, into an exclusive, reservation-only Michelin star model.
That's a perfect analogy.
They want fewer customers, but they want each customer to spend significantly more. I mean, Greece is literally implementing daily caps on visitors and cruise passengers in the most congested areas.
And they're trying to extend the season too.
Right. They are targeting the silver economy, which
Yeah.
basically means trying to get Northern European retirees to come spend the entire winter there. They are also offering digital nomad visas to high-income remote workers.
So, I mean, let's look at the mechanics of this.
Okay.
Can a country really just turn off cheap mass tourism without severely hurting the locals who rely on that massive foot traffic to keep their shops open?
That is the big question.
It is a highly delicate transition, and you've hit on the main socioeconomic risk. You cannot simply ban cruise ships and expect a local souvenir shop to instantly pivot to serving high-net-worth digital nomads.
Right. The guy selling 3 euro magnets isn't suddenly going to start selling luxury watches.
Exactly. So to bridge that gap, the Greek government is strategically deploying European Union recovery and resilience funds to build out alternatives. Things like year-round cultural tourism, agro-tourism, and upgrading local infrastructure, so regions outside the famous islands can actually attract visitors.
Spreading the wealth around a bit.
Yeah. But even with those investments, tourism leaves Greece heavily exposed to external shocks. In fact, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Bank of Greece recently revised its 2026 growth forecast down to 1.9%.
Oh, wow.
They explicitly cited the escalation of the Middle East conflict as a major macroeconomic risk.
Ah, of course. Because if the Middle East gets more unstable, global oil prices spike. And when oil spikes, disposable income in places like Germany or the UK drops.
Exactly. Flights get more expensive, and European families simply cancel their Mediterranean vacations.
So they are incredibly vulnerable to things happening hundreds of miles away.
And that reveals the overarching strategy of the Greek state right now. When your primary industry is that vulnerable to external shocks, whether it's regional war, inflation, or energy prices, you are forced to aggressively protect your physical and economic borders.
Right.
Greece's economy is highly sensitive to the Mediterranean's geopolitical temperature, so Athens is armoring up.
And they are taking this incredibly seriously. Here's where it gets really interesting. Greece is currently spending over 3.1% of its GDP on defense. That puts them in the top 5 of NATO contributors by share of GDP.
You're not holding back.
No. In 2025, they announced a 12-year, 25 billion euro defense plan. They are purchasing Rafale fighter jets, F-35As, French Belhar frigates. But the absolute centerpiece of this strategy is something called the Achilles Shield.
Yeah, the Achilles Shield.
Yeah.
It is a 2.8 billion euro integrated defense architecture slated to be fully operational by 2027.
I have to say, the name sounds like something straight out of a comic book, but the technology is very real. We are talking about an AI-powered system networking anti-drone, anti-ballistic, anti-missile, and anti-submarine capabilities.
It's massively ambitious.
How does something like this actually change the military balance, though?
Well, it shifts defense from a hardware game to a software game. Traditionally, if you want to stop a drone, you fire an expensive missile from a ship.
Which costs way more than the drone itself.
Exactly. But the Achilles Shield integrates data from radar stations across hundreds of islands. So if an unidentifiable drone takes off in the Eastern Mediterranean, the AI network processes that data in milliseconds.
Wow.
It identifies the threat and instantly communicates with the entire grid to select the absolute cheapest, most effective countermeasure. It might use a ground-based laser or electronic jamming or a localized missile.
So it's not just firing blindly.
Right. It creates a highly resilient network dome over the agent. And the rationale here is anchored in the lessons of high-intensity warfare from Ukraine, coupled with, unresolved maritime disputes in their own neighborhood.
We'll get to in a second.
But here's the real aha moment in Dr. Novin's analysis. Greece isn't just building a military shield, it is building an energy shield.
Okay, let's unpack that. How does energy act as a shield?
By making themselves the post-Russian energy node for the European Union. They're currently building the Jirigai interconnector. This is a 954-kilometer submarine cable that will transmit 3,000 megawatts of solar power from Egypt directly to Greece.
And that's a 4.2 billion euro project, right?
Yeah. Then you have the Alexandroupolis multimodal hub in the north. It acts as a floating storage regasification unit for liquid natural gas. So it basically receives LNG ships, turns the liquid back into gas, and pipes it deep into Europe.
Okay, but it's not just energy?
No, it also serves as a NATO logistical base.
So, by physically connecting North African solar power and global LNG to the European grid through Greek territory, they are essentially making themselves indispensable.
That's the goal.
If Greece's grid goes down, Europe's lights flicker.
That dual-use nature is the entire point. By becoming the indispensable energy gateway for the broader continent, Greece aligns its own national security directly with Brussels' strategic interests.
It's brilliant, actually.
If someone threatens Greece, they are now threatening the European Union's energy supply.
Here's where the geopolitics gets incredibly tense, though. Because as Greece expands this energy chessboard, they bump up against serious geopolitical friction, specifically with Turkey. We have to look at another massive submarine cable project called the Great Sea Interconnector, or GSI.
Right, the GSI.
This cable is designed to link the power grids of Crete, Cyprus, and Israel. But the project was dramatically paused in early 2025. Why? Because of Turkish naval harassment. Turkey literally deployed 5 warships to obstruct the survey operations for the cable in waters that both Greece and Turkey claim as their own.
It's a very volatile situation. And to understand the regional dynamics impartially, we really have to look at how both nations view that water.
Right, because both sides have very firm stances.
Exactly. The Greek-Turkish relationship right now is characterized in the report as a cautious calm. You have visible, polite, diplomatic meetings, but the structural tensions are deep. Turkey operates on a doctrine known as the Blue Homeland.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, this doctrine asserts Turkish maritime jurisdiction over large swaths of the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean.
Which, of course, directly overlaps and conflicts with Greece's own sovereign maritime maps.
Exactly. Turkey has formally protested Greece's maps to the EU, labeling them as maximalist. Meanwhile, to protect these energy corridors, Greece is planning joint naval and air exercises with Cyprus and Israel in 2026 to create a layered deterrence.
You essentially have a region defined by incredibly lucrative infrastructure projects layered right over totally irreconcilable visions of who actually controls the water.
It is a true geopolitical fault line. Becoming a regional anchor doesn't stop in the Mediterranean. They're using their stabilized economy to extend their influence deep into the Balkans.
Yeah, the report calls this the Balkan lever. It details how Serbia is actually Greece's most substantive bilateral partner in the region, with over $850 million in trade in 2023.
Which is an interesting dynamic.
Very. Greece is one of only 5 EU states that refuses to recognize Kosovo's independence, which inherently strengthens their ties with Belgrade. But there's tension because Serbia operates on what Dr. Novin calls dual alignment.
Right, they want to join the European Union, but they absolutely refuse to sanction Russia.
Which puts Athens in a highly complex diplomatic position. Greece is an EU and NATO member trying to champion Serbia's accession to the EU, while Serbia flirts with Moscow.
And Greece is not afraid to use its leverage either.
No, not at all.
For example, they are actively using their veto power over Albania's EU accession path regarding minority rights. There was a major diplomatic incident recently, the Baleri case, where an ethnic Greek mayor was arrested in Albania, and Greece essentially halted Albania's EU progress in response.
They're playing a very sophisticated, multidimensional game of regional integration. Which brings us to, honestly, the most complex part of the report, how global investors are actually measuring all of this progress.
Ah, yes, the math.
Dr. Novin's paper uses something called a Bayesian game of incomplete information to forecast Greece's economic path from 2026 to 2030. I'll admit, when I first read this section, I thought, is this just a highly academic, mathematically dense way of saying investors are currently passing the vibe check on Greece?
I mean, I can see why you'd think that.
Yeah.
But it is actually a way of quantifying trust.
Okay, break that down for me.
To understand the math, you have to look at it from the investor's perspective. The incomplete information part of the theory means that as an investor, you cannot know for certain what a government is going to do tomorrow.
Right. You don't know if a Greek politician is secretly planning to abandon all these fiscal rules and revert to populism once they secure your capital.
Exactly. They can't read their minds. So investors have to infer the government's true nature through costly signals.
Costly signals.
Yeah. A costly signal is an action that a populist government simply wouldn't take, like maintaining a strict primary budget surplus despite public pressure, or transparently utilizing EU funds without corruption. The math models how investors update their beliefs based on these signals.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the most recent data point is staggering. Earlier in 2026, the Greek government issued a €4 billion bond.
Oh, I remember reading about this.
It had nearly 50 billion euros in demand. It was oversubscribed 12.4 times.
That is wild.
Right. Based on that massive demand, the Bayesian model calculates that international investors currently assign a 0.75 probability that the Greek government is genuinely reformist.
So the market has a 75% mathematical confidence rate that Greece is not going to backslide into its old ways.
That's the core of it. And based on that confidence interval, the analysis lays out 4 possible scenarios for where Greece is by 2030.
Right, let's go through them. The first is the high growth path.
Yeah, this is the ideal outcome. The reforms continue, capital floods into these new energy and tech sectors, and public debt drops below 125% of GDP.
The second scenario is fragmented growth. This happens if they nail the massive energy infrastructure projects, but fail to implement deeper judicial or administrative reforms.
Which would lead to a two-speed economy. Athens and the tourist islands thrive, but the rural interior lags behind, and debt creeps back up to around 140%.
Then the third is the external shock scenario, and this operates independently of the government's competence.
Right. If we see a severe escalation in the Middle East, it spikes oil prices, tanks the tourism industry, and the Greek economy simply stagnates despite their absolute best efforts.
And the fourth, the absolute worst-case scenario, is geopolitical disruption.
This is the nightmare scenario.
Tensions in the Aegean boil over into kinetic conflict. Projects like the Great Sea Interconnector stall permanently, and defense spending has to skyrocket, which crowds out all other public investment. Economic growth drops below 1%.
What this entire mathematical framework reveals is that a nation's reputation is a tangible, quantifiable asset. Greece spent a grueling decade accumulating this credibility, but it is fragile.
Very fragile.
It could vanish instantly if those internal reforms stall, or if the geopolitical realities of their neighborhood overwhelm them.
And we really cannot ignore the lingering vulnerabilities right at home. As much as they have modernized, tax evasion remains a systemic issue.
It's still a big problem.
But more importantly, while they are building all this futuristic infrastructure, they have a rapidly aging population and a female unemployment rate of 10.5%.
Which is the second highest in the entire EU.
Driven largely by traditional gender roles in certain regions and a severe lack of childcare infrastructure.
Those are the internal friction points. You can build all the subsea cables and AI shields you want, but infrastructure doesn't automatically solve demographic decline.
Exactly. So what does this all mean for you as you listen to this? How do you apply this to your own understanding of how nations recover?
It's a lot to process.
It is. We've traced an incredible arc today. We started with the hidden debts of the 2004 Olympics and the crushing reality of the 2008 financial crisis, which required the painful, methodical clearing of bank ledgers through the APS program.
Which is not easy.
Not at all. We explored how freeing up that capital allowed them to pivot a massive tourism sector from a high-volume trap to a high-yield model. We've seen how they deploy AI-powered missile shields and underwrite subsea energy cables, not just for power, but to make themselves physically indispensable to Europe.
It is a masterclass in a country reclaiming its own agency. It demonstrates that economic recovery isn't just a matter of balancing a spreadsheet.
Right.
True recovery is about translating fiscal discipline into actual geopolitical relevance. Greece has taken its geography, which historically left it incredibly vulnerable to Mediterranean conflicts, and engineered it into its greatest strategic asset.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building entirely on those internal demographic friction points we just mentioned.
Okay.
Greece is successfully transforming into a high-tech geopolitical fortress by 2030. They are laying thousands of kilometers of subsea power cables to Egypt. They are networking the AI-driven Achilles shield. They are setting up enclaves for wealthy digital nomads.
All massive undertakings.
Yes. But with a rapidly aging population and such a high rate of female unemployment, here is the question you have to ask yourself. As they finish building these formidable economic and defensive walls, will their fundamental domestic demographics actually allow them to man those walls and power that economy from within?
That's the real test.
Or will this incredible decade-long turnaround ultimately leave them permanently reliant on external forces and foreign labor to keep the machine running?
It's the ultimate test of whether a physical turnaround can outpace a demographic reality.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, look for the mechanisms behind the surface numbers, and we will catch you next time.